This video is sponsored by Squarespace. All the way back in chapter 17, Buggy said that if Luffy was going to become the king of the pirates, then he would become the god of the pirates. And now back then, I don't think anyone could really blame you for not taking him that seriously, but as we've seen over the course of the story, Buggy just continues to fail upwards over and over again, almost keeping up with Luffy, at least in terms of influence and stature, where they both went all the way from the East Blue to now holding the title of Yonko. And now we know that Buggy's even motivated his crew to go after the One Piece, so Oda very clearly has big plans for this man going forward, and maybe we should revisit this whole pirate god idea. Now, to be clear, this isn't a title that we've actually heard outside of this context, but obviously this should be something people view as even above the king of the pirates. I mean, what's a pirate king to a pirate god, right? That's pretty much why Buggy even said that line in the first place. He wants to one-up Luffy in some way. But as we've seen so many times in the story, the title of god is simply that, just a title. Enel, the Shandora Snakes, Gonfall, the Celestial Dragons, and several others have not actually been gods beyond the fact people call them a god. And that's why Pirate God is a perfect fit for Buggy. All it requires is people to believe that it's true. Kinda similar to what we've seen with God Usopp. And that's basically Buggy's specialty at this point. He's able to make people believe in him and join his side, a little like Luffy does, but in a completely opposite way. Where Buggy always finds a way to get credit for things, even when he may not necessarily deserve it, while Luffy doesn't even like to be considered a hero, even when he actually acts like one. And now that we know Luffy has the powers of the Sun God, maybe Buggy at least being called a god later on is possible, especially if his awakening ends up being something extremely special like Luffy's was, which is something I'm going to cover much more later on in the video. Because on the surface, you may think that Luffy is a more natural candidate for Pirate God, given that he'll become the Pirate King and already has the Sun God's powers. And maybe this could even be a way to kind of signify that he surpassed Roger, I guess. But that just isn't his goal. He's told us countless times that his goal is to become the king of the pirates, which we know is essentially synonymous with getting the One Piece. And like I said, he's made it clear he doesn't even like the title of hero, so I can't imagine that he would like the title of god either. But that may be impossible for him to escape as the final saga continues, because we've met more and more people who are not only aware of the legend of Nika, but also that Luffy has those powers, like Kuma and Vegapunk for example. Even Saturn seemed almost thankful that Bonnie hadn't made that connection yet, presumably because her belief in him would make her powers even stronger. So I don't think it's a stretch to think that at some point, the world will become aware of this legend somehow as well, meaning that they will actually come to view Luffy as a type of god. I mean, his bounty poster's already out there which ties that form to his name, so it's going to be really hard for him to escape. Maybe they could even find out the rest of this Nika information through the papers, or even a live broadcast, which I talked about in this video here, because we all know that Morgans loves to hype Luffy up. If he catches word that Luffy actually has ties to some kind of god, who knows what he might do. But again, I doubt Luffy's gonna like that type of attention. If Luffy doesn't think that a hero gets to eat all the meat, surely the Sun God wouldn't get to either. So after the story's over and Luffy kind of saves the world, I think that he'll need to basically pass that god title off to someone else, so then he can go live a normal life. And that's where Buggy might come into play. I mean, even in the Cross Guild right now, Crocodile and Mihawk reasoned that it was worth it for Buggy to act as the figurehead and take the heat off of them. I think the same exact type of thing will happen later on, but with Luffy passing god duties to Buggy, so basically that the paparazzi just leaves him alone. Which should make some sense because we all know that Buggy would like nothing more than to be considered a god and to be worshipped by the masses. I mean, that's basically what he has going on already. Just take a look at how his followers treat him, and he really hasn't done that much to earn it outside of taking advantage of opportunities, which I suppose he should still get some credit for. I mean, even in chapter 1082, he took advantage of the opportunity in front of him with all the strength that the Cross Guild has to go after the thing he's always wanted. But regardless, people's belief in Buggy is more based on perception than reality. And again, the same thing goes for basically all gods in One Piece. In pretty much every instance that we've seen someone be called a god, it was only because people believe that that was the case. Buggy just needs to do something that makes people believe he is the pirate god, and that he's even above the pirate king, I guess, even if the title means nothing in reality. And that's what makes it such a great rebuttal to Luffy being the pirate king, which is a title that has a very clear meaning, which is that they found the One Piece, an achievement which tons of pirates would literally do anything to have. But pirate god can just be whatever Buggy wants, basically, especially since it's not a title that we've heard before. But now, how will Buggy accomplish this? What could possibly make people believe Buggy should be worshipped over the guy who saved the world? Well, I think the easiest way would be just to convince everyone that he defeated Luffy. I mean, what better way would there be to claim a title such as Pirate God than to make people believe you defeated the Pirate King and Sun God? Maybe Buggy will just finish his business from Logtown like you probably saw in the thumbnail already, because by doing that, he might convince people he's a god slayer almost like Nolan did in Skypiea. I mean, even the scaffolding that they're on can kind of act as the ancient altar from Skypiea, right? The parallel is kind of there, and it also parallels perfectly with Roger, who was executed at that very same place soon after becoming Pirate King. But of course, with any good circus act, there would be a trick to it. Buggy wouldn't actually kill Luffy, but they would just make it seem like he did. Because again, a big point of this is that Luffy gets to avoid the limelight, not that he actually has to die in the process. It's kind of like after Wano when Luffy asked Momo not to tell anyone about him. So then all the kids were just taught that Joy Boy saved them instead, as well as the fact that Joy Boy had already left the country. But then when it comes to a global event like the Final War, that Joy Boy excuse that Momo used isn't going to work as easily. The world isn't kept closed in quite like Wano is, and the bounty posters have already been printed anyway, right? So after it's all over, Luffy is going to need an out of some kind, and Buggy's just the perfect person for it. Not just because of his ability to have people follow him, but also because of his devil fruit. That's the thing that makes all of this possible. But before we dive into that, I want to talk about the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace. I know that creating a professional looking website on your own can seem kind of daunting at first, but Squarespace's Fluid Engine makes that entire process so easy that you'll have one up and running in no time at all. You just start by choosing one of their many different template options, customizing practically as many different details as you want, and that even includes adding pages for selling merch or other products on an online store, and even scheduling appointments. I actually made my own website with Squarespace, and the version that you're seeing right now literally took me about 60 minutes to make. And here's me updating the site just a few days before this video went live to kind of hype up its release. And as you can see, the UI is so intuitive that it takes me literally just minutes to change what I need to. And if you head over to squarespace.com right now, you can even get a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, just go to squarespace.com/daxsake to save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring, but let's get back to the video. So the reason that Buggy's devil fruit is relevant in this regard is for two reasons. One is the awakening, which I'll discuss last, and two is that his fruit provides a pretty clear inversion to Luffy's, because Luffy is weak to slash attacks while Buggy is basically immune to them, and the opposite holds true for blunt attacks. Both of them ate their fruits in the presence of Shanks without really knowing what they were doing, and both of them even used their fruits to appear larger than they actually are. But in a very fitting fashion, Luffy does it by actually becoming giant using his awakening, and Buggy fakes it by just expanding those robes out by separating his body. There is no devil fruit that's quite as opposite to Luffy's as Buggy's, and with their journeys also kind of acting as mirrors of one another as well, I think it's fair to start asking what Oda has in store for Buggy's awakening too. Because if Luffy's brought about all this lore of Nika and the most ridiculous power in the world and all that, surely Buggy's has to have some important role too. I mean, Nika was even said to put smiles on people's faces, and what are clowns supposed to do? Well, not that they actually do that most of the time, but still, they're supposed to make people smile as well. So when it comes to his awakening, like most paramecias, it should let him affect his surroundings, meaning he should be able to split other things apart like he does with his own body, and maybe he could even move them around as well. And this might sound a bit like Law's devil fruit with extra steps, and that's because it sort of is. Their powers have always been a little bit similar, but opposites to one another, because what Buggy does to his own body, Law is able to do with other people's bodies, at least within his room. Now, Law has a lot of other abilities on top of that, of course, but still I think you can see the connection. And this actually makes Buggy somewhat of a counter to Law, I think, because Buggy is used to having his body chopped up into pieces, and most of Law's attacks require an incision of some kind, which should then cause Buggy to split up too. That kind of makes the bit between Law and Luffy at the end of Wano a bit funnier, where Law had a lot of respect for Buggy since he earned the title of Yonko and everything, but Luffy was trying to convince him that Buggy's a scrub. Now, I don't know if Buggy would necessarily defeat beat Law in a fight, but I don't think Law would beat Buggy either. Or if he did, it would be like by putting him in a cage or something as opposed to actually hurting him. If Law ever does join the Cross Guild, the reason might be that he can't defeat Buggy. But the reason that I even bring all of this up is that Buggy's awakening should let him do to other people basically what Law does already, which is break them into pieces without actually hurting them. But something that Oda specifically has shown us with Law is that Haki can stop devil fruit powers from working on other people. Law noted this on the rooftop when it came to using shambles on Big Mom or Kaido, and this is why his awakening helped a lot against Big Mom. He was basically able to bypass her exterior and hurt her from the inside. I'm sure that he would have preferred to cut her into pieces or something if he was able to, but it seems like he needed awakening to bypass all of that. And then later on, when he pulled up against Blackbeard, he was able to reverse the Milady virus using his own Haki, and he even mentioned how he learned that from fighting Kaido and Big Mom. So I think there is a reason that Oda's focusing this Haki and devil fruit interaction thing on Law specifically, and it might be because his powers are so similar to Buggy's, and we have yet to see Buggy's awakening. And I think another interesting observation to make here is that awakenings seem to bypass some of those Haki restrictions. Like I said, Big Mom was apparently able to stop herself from being shambled, but she couldn't stop herself from getting hurt by the Kroom attacks, or even being assigned by Kid. And similarly, Luffy was able to turn Kaido to rubber as much as he wanted, even though earlier in the fight, Kaido was able to use Haki to stop himself from being affected by Law's unawakened powers. Now, I'm not sure what the reason for this would be exactly. I mean, maybe it's tied to lineage factor or something, since awakening almost lets you share your powers temporarily with those things around you. But whatever the reason is, there does seem to be a connection here. And I think that Buggy's awakening will be kind of the shining example of this. Because if this trend continues, then Buggy's awakening should let him split people up regardless of Haki, which will probably impress Law quite a bit. I think Oda is going to make a massive joke out of this Law and Buggy thing at some point. I mean, we're kind of wondering where Law is going right now with Beppo, and maybe he's going to Empty Bluff, or maybe he'll just run into Buggy's new ship at some point. I mean, if you think about it, Buggy already has a distinct advantage over Mihawk since he's a swordsman and everything. Kind of saw that in Marineford already. And Buggy is also the only one to stab Zoro in the back. So the list of feats against great swordsmen may only continue, especially when it comes to Law. And then I also think that there's going to be a second layer to this awakening, which is that he can break himself up into smaller and smaller pieces, almost like raindrops, which may be what makes his power unironically like the rain god. Now, this is an idea that I have discussed before in this video right here, and I first heard it from Parvision in this video, but I want to add on to it because there's a couple new connections that I think are definitely worth making in regards to this theory about Buggy becoming pirate god. So the first reason why this rain god connection even makes sense is that we first heard of those four gods in Skypiea, which were the sun, rain, earth, and forest gods, which has led to a lot of theories about who the other gods may be since Luffy was revealed to have the powers of the sun god. But obviously, Luffy doesn't have sun powers, right? It's more of a symbolic sort of thing, which is why I doubt Green Bull will be the forest god, for example. And I think that someone like Chopper might be a better fit for that, which I have done a video on that you can watch here. But similarly to Luffy, Buggy could be more of a symbolic rain god by not having the powers of weather or water in any way, but simply by breaking himself up into raindrop-sized pieces, or even smaller than that. I mean, imagine if you just kept slicing Buggy infinitely until you couldn't do so anymore. How small could it get? Like molecule-sized, I guess? And taking his powers to that extreme at will is what I expect his awakening will do. And maybe the first time that he actually awakens will be because someone puts his chop powers to the test, where they just keep chopping over and over, almost forcing Buggy to awaken and break into pieces so small that they're almost impossible to chop anymore. Or, even better than that, what if the reason that Buggy is forced to break into really tiny pieces is because Crocodile dries him out and turns him into sand, which, you know, for most people would kill them on the spot, but for someone like Buggy who can already break into pieces, maybe he'll just need a little bit of water and he'll be back to normal, which would then mean that not only is Buggy a counter to Mihawk, but maybe also Crocodile, because both of them at least kind of rely on breaking up someone's body to beat them. Neither of them are really physical fighters like Luffy is, for example. I mean, even Crocodile's hook may not work very well if Buggy can just split himself up. And you also got to think about the irony of this in terms of Crocodile in the rain situation from Alabasta. If Buggy is the rain god, then him being Crocodile's boss is just like too perfect, especially if he counters him with awakening as well. That connection would just be like a galaxy brain play from Oda, I think. But to tie this all back back to the pirate god stuff, like I said earlier, the best way for that title to happen is for Buggy to convince the world that he took out Luffy. I guess you could say that BKL, Buggy kills Luffy, is my agenda here. But of course with an asterisk, because it would all just be a show. Luffy wouldn't actually die here, but pretending would maybe be the only way to avoid the limelight for the rest of his life. And that's where Buggy's awakening comes in. Because just like you see on the thumbnail, what I envision is that after the final war is over, we're gonna get a second coming of that Logtown scene. But Buggy will succeed this time. Sort of, at least. Because thanks to his awakening, Luffy won't actually be dead. It'll look like his head got chopped off to everyone else, but as we know, it's not that simple. It would basically be the same thing as if Law was doing it. Now, maybe the most astute of observers would notice that there's no blood coming out, and knowing Luffy, his head will probably still be very animated instead of playing dead like he's supposed to, so I think some people might pick up on the fact he's not actually dead, but just like the goofy story that One Piece already is, this could still act as a perfect way to kind of cap things off. Because this would give a lot of people enough reason to almost worship Buggy and treat him like the actual pirate god. And at the same time, it would stop people from seeking out Luffy directly. Their attention would basically shift over to someone else. And I think this would also be a good story to tell from the perspective of the future leaders of the world. Kinda like Momo had to do in Wano, I think every leader around the world is gonna need a legend to tell their people about what happened to their savior. Because by the end, they're probably all gonna know that Luffy, or Nika by some extension, was a real person, at least for some period of time. I mean, a lot of them already do, and like I said, the bounty poster isn't really helping that secret stay a secret, so the world leaders are gonna need an answer for their people. And since most of those leaders already know Luffy pretty well, they'll probably be in on this plan with Buggy as well, and just agree to tell their people that Luffy actually died, even if they know it's not actually true. And honestly, even if the leaders go with this whole story and write in their history books that Luffy died by the hands of Buggy and everything, I bet a lot of the people living today would still know that it's not necessarily true, but they still kind of go along with it. Kind of like in Dressrosa, where they knew that Luffy saved them specifically because Gats told them, but afterward they still made a statue of Luffy. So I think the people that are left after the final war may understand that Luffy was real and that he didn't actually die, but they'll go along with it so the people of the future believe the legend that they're being told. Because ironically, by creating this pirate god legend where, you know, the sun god gets killed, it actually proves the point that I've been trying to make throughout this video, where gods in One Piece just aren't real. It probably isn't a good thing to rely on a specific god to come save you all the time. If it ends up being where they all hear the legend of Nika and then it comes true where Nika comes back and saves them all in the form of Luffy, then people might get kind of hooked onto that idea and think that Nika will always help them in a sense. But if Nika gets killed by Buggy, who then, you know, consequentially gets called Pirate God, it still would show to them that, you know, Nika wasn't necessarily a god, which is a good thing, because you don't need a god to come save you, right? By Nika dying right in front of them, it might also prove that any of them can become quote-unquote gods. It's not a good thing to rely on some deity to come save you, even if it'll ironically kind of work out during the final saga. And with Buggy being dubbed the pirate god after this, I also wonder if there's a chance that he also just becomes like a figurehead for the world government as well, almost taking Emu's spot, except not really. He would just be kind of a similar thing to what he is for the Cross Guild right now, where instead of Crocodile and Mihawk calling the shots, maybe Vivi and the other world leaders are pulling all the strings, which would kind of be a reversal to the current regime, which features a single secret leader being Emu above the public-facing group being the Gorosei. Now, in all honesty, I do think Vivi fills this role a little bit better, especially with all the Lily connections and stuff, but she does also need to lead Alabasta, so letting Buggy be the face of whatever government exists in the future makes a lot of sense as well, as long as Vivi's still calling the shots, because the world would probably listen to anything Buggy has to say. So if the world leaders go and make a decision, but then have Buggy communicate it, the world would be a lot more aligned than they usually are, even if Buggy isn't really the god that they think he is. And that kind of leads me to a broader question of if the legend we're being told about Nika right now is accurate as well. Could the story that was passed down to us be a romanticized version of the real thing? Could the story of Nika be somewhat like the situation that I'm describing right now, where Nika was mostly a normal person that people just thought attained godhood because of some kind of rubber powers, which led to all the stories of today? I think that's actually a pretty likely scenario, but unfortunately this is all the time that I have for this video, so instead maybe check out one of these two videos where I dive into that very subject. But before you go, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe because it does really help the channel and support the algorithm. But until next time, later.